spring into Storytime. My name is Helen and I work at Miltown Malbay Library. Today I would like to read you a story from this book, Nature's Hidden Adventures. This book was written and published by Shane Casey and illustrations are by Vincent Killowry. The Tale of Two Hedgehogs. It was getting late on a mild July evening when Hazel set eyes on Roland for the very first time. The sun had already bid good night to the day, and the moon had draped his silvery cloak across the fields of wheat and barley. Hazel was climbing over the brow of a ditch when she saw something peculiar. It was Roland, and he was doing his best to unearth a big, juicy earthworm from beneath the hedge. Roland's eyes were shut tight, his breath was held, and a tiny, high-pitched squeal escaped his lips as he pulled the earthworm with all his might. Of course, the earthworm wasn't going to give up without a fight, so it wrapped its long body tightly around the roots and stones in the ground. Eventually, though, it couldn't hold on any more, and with one last great pull from Roland, the earthworm came loose. Now, what happened next is a story that Hazel has never let Roland live down. Roland, you see, was not expecting the earthworm to come loose in that moment, and he accidentally let go of it. Well, the earthworm went flying through the air in a cloud of clay and dust. Roland went tumbling head over heels backwards and ended up a dazed, dusty ball of spikes. And Hazel simply burst out laughing. In fact, she was laughing so much that she too ended up rolling around on the ground, which was lucky for the earthworm, as it managed to escape back down its tunnel before either Roland or Hazel could pull themselves together. It was only when Roland was back on his feet and had given himself a good shakedown that he finally noticed Hazel for the first time. Hazel was, without a doubt, the most beautiful hedgehog he had ever seen, with deep brown eyes that were filled with mischief. Hazel was nearly 12 weeks old. Like other young hedgehogs her own age, she had already left home and was quite capable of taking care of herself. Roland, on the other hand, who was just shy of 9 weeks old, was still adjusting to life on his own. Hedgehogs, you see, are solitary animals. Once they leave home at around 8 weeks of age, they spend the rest of their lives on their own. They snooze all day in their nest of grass and dry leaves. Then each evening, as the sun fades from the day, they emerge and go about their business. This, of course, mainly involves nosing through the undergrowth in search of scrumptious slugs, zesty spiders, and crispy caterpillars for their tea. However, each night Roland and Hazel would always make sure to meet up, and each night it would be somewhere different. At the gap in the hedge, at the base of the old beech tree, or even in the garden behind the farmhouse. They would tell each other everything that they had seen and done that evening. And when there was nothing left to say, they would simply sit in silence and try to count all the stars in the sky. Then, as dawn began to break across the horizon, they would say their goodbyes and return to their nests once again. Summer quickly passed them by until the leaves of the trees began to change their colours. Roland and Hazel both knew they would soon have to find somewhere to hibernate. All hedgehogs hibernate. First they find somewhere safe to spend the winter months. Then they slow down their breathing and heart rate so it appears like they're in a very deep sleep. Needless to say, when they wake up, they immediately go in search of food. After all, they won't have had anything to eat for 5 long months. Now, most hedgehogs hibernate alone, but sometimes a male and female will hibernate together. And that is exactly what Hazel and Roland decided to do. The only question that remained was, where? They tried an old rabbit's burrow at the bottom of the field, but there wasn't enough space for 2. They tried under the hedge, but the ground was too stony and not very comfortable. They tried under the garden shed, but the farmyard cat kept pestering them. They tried in the compost heap, but it was very smelly in there. They tried under a pile of sticks, but it wasn't very secure. Poor Roland and Hazel. They were fast running out of options, and the weather was already turning colder. They had almost given up hope when finally, at the back of the hayshed, there lay an old ash tree, which had fallen over many years ago during a storm. Its trunk had become hollow over time, and it was there in the heart of that old ash tree that Hazel and Roland found the perfect place to hibernate. So, working together, they quickly gathered leaves and moss to make it warm and comfortable. Then, nestled side by side, they began to hibernate. That's how they stayed, snuggled warmly together as the winter storms howled outside, until finally the first snowdrops began to bloom, announcing the end of winter and heralding the beginning of spring. The end.